ROI on rental properties. This is part two, guys. All right. Return on investment. So we covered in the other blog your month to month cash flow and the income aspect of your return on your investment. Now, what about the appreciation, right? Because you could own this building 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, right? What does that look like over time? How's Fall River doing? How's the appreciation been in Fall River? And I'll tell you, there are some great little nuggets that we uncovered in this data. Okay. So here's what I did. Here's the process, how I did it. So I went into MLS, the multiple listing service, right? As a broker, we have access to this. I downloaded every single multifamily sale in Fall River from 2004 to yesterday. So June of 2025, June 9th. Okay. So there were, I mean, there's just thousands of them, right? 5,220 to be exact. Okay. So I went through that data. I cleaned up like errors that just were weird. They didn't have the number of units. They had one unit, it was like 10 or 15, but there was enough data there to work with and identify some trends. Now, guys, I'm really, really good at Google Sheets and Excel and making formulas, but I got to be honest, I didn't want to spend, 3 days making all these formulas. So I will say I took this data and I worked with Grok. Grok is awesome. That's Twitter's AI. Okay. And I put it in and I just kind of went back and forth with Grok. And Grok gave me some amazing feedback that, I think kind of meets what I expected to see. And, so let's get into it. Okay. So when you're measuring an investment long term, something that you buy and hold, a store of value, right? One of the things you need to consider is CAGR, right? Which is compound annual growth rate. Okay. So that means, every year an asset grows. Okay. And it's compounded. So if something grows at 5% a year and it's worth 100,000 in year one, in year two, it's worth 105,000. In year three, it's worth 5% more than 105,000, right? So you're earning 5% on that 5 grand of growth. Okay. And that's all investments work that way. So over time, you can see the growth of an asset, right? Bitcoin has a much higher CAGR than treasury bills. Okay. Real estate actually performed pretty well in Fall River over time, right? And you can see, had you bought at certain times, where you would have a higher growth rate than if you bought at other times. So let's throw this in and see. Okay, so this is the data that we came up with. Now we separated this. There's two classes of multifamily properties, guys. Okay, and this is very important. So your 2 to 4 unit buildings is one class, and your 5 units or more is another class. So you need to understand that when you're out and you're shopping for properties and you're working with us as our client, we're helping you buy a property. 2 to 4 unit properties always sell for a higher per unit value than 5 units or higher because there's a much bigger buyer pool. So somebody could walk into a 3 family in Fall River with 3.5% down and buy it, and with a 30-year mortgage, fixed rate, and live there. 5 units or higher, that's commercial. So you're looking at 20 to 25% down. You're not going to live there. The loan's only 5 to 10 years because the banks don't want to get stuck with it for 30 years because commercial is very volatile. So that's a different buyer pool. So there's a lot less buyers for 5 unit than there are for a 3 unit, right? A 3 unit in Fall River right now might sell for 800,000. A 6 unit, you would think, wow, all right, that's almost 300,000 a door. That means a 6 unit should be 1.6 million. Nope. 6 unit on the high end is like 1.2, all right, as low as 900 to 1.2. So it just depends, so just understand the difference there, okay? Because you're going to see some different numbers. So had you bought a 3 family, okay, in 2004 at the start of our period, and you held it 21 years, your compound annual growth rate was about 4%. Okay, so every year that property appreciated 4% over that 21 years. Now, what's happened in that 21 years? We had the great financial crisis where the bottom of the market, I'd say, was probably 2011. So when the whole real estate market crashed, so you bought kind of high, you rode that dip down, and then you've since rode it all the way up, right? 5 unit building, again, if you had held for that time period, about 1% higher return. Okay, and you're going to see a common theme here. The bigger buildings do appreciate more over time. Okay, now had you bought in 2010, so had you waited and bought 15 years ago instead of 21 and bought the dip. We always talk about buying the dips. Right? Okay, so if you had bought that dip in 2010 when nobody was sniffing Fall River, you would have doubled your return over the course of that time period, right? So instead of 4% a year, you're getting over 9% a year. Okay. And had you bought a bigger building instead of 5% almost, you're getting 11. So you can see timing is everything. Okay. The ideal time to buy, according to the data, was 2015. Right. And again, I did a 2-year look back, a 3-year, 5-year, 7-year, 10-year. If you guys are interested, I can deep dive this a little more because I'm curious to see myself too. But I didn't want to have too many charts. But had you bought in 2015, okay, you would have actually got a 11.5% compound annual growth rate. So the guy who bought in 2004 is getting 4% a year growth because they lost so much in that dip. So averaged out, it really affects their return. Okay. Had you bought at the bottom, you got almost 12% return holding for 10 years. So that's amazing, right? That's that the building doubled, more than doubled. Okay. And if you had bought a bigger building, a 5 unit or higher, you got a 14%. Now, had you waited a little bit and bought in 2018, you still got a pretty good 10% annual return on a 3-family, 13 on a commercial. Now, what about the COVID period? Okay, so from the start of COVID, 2020 to today, buildings in Fall River have appreciated 9%. Okay, the 2 to 4 units, and then 13% on the 5 units or higher. Okay, and then 2022. So that was kind of the height of the market here, guys, right? 2022 was kind of the top. Rates were low. That was right before all the rates started going up. Had you bought at that top, you're right back to where you were 21 years ago, right? 4.79%, 9.27. So timing is everything for long-term holds, okay? And then 2 years, had you waited a year and not bought 22, you would have bought 23, you would have doubled your return on a 2 to 4 unit, and you would have got about a 50% more of a return on a 5 unit. Now, the trailing 12 months are very interesting. We know that our economy is in rough shape right now, right? Rates are high. There's a lot of uncertainty out there. Had you bought a building a year ago to today, you've only got about a 3.5% return on that 3-family and 11% on a 5 unit, right? So what does that tell you? The market for those 2 to 4 units kind of flattened out, which we've seen that. Those peaked out. There's some that are still doing in the 800s, but there's a lot more these last 6 to 12 months I'm seeing listed with a 6 in front. 3 years ago, at the top of the market, those buildings got bid up like crazy because the rates were so low. And there's some dynamics there too with FHA loans that kind of affect that. Okay. So if you want to go in depth on this blog, you can go in depth on our website and kind of read through the blog. And we did some case studies on here, so very interesting data that we found, so holding real estate long-term, no matter when you bought, you didn't lose, right? 4% a year for 21 years is a pretty good return. That's what people do for T-bills, right? So had you bought a treasury account, you wouldn't have got that return for 21 years because the rates were so low going back. So, over time, if you hold these assets, they do accumulate in value. Okay. So the perfect scenario you want to kind of time it right where we think, and again, these are all looking back, right? So you never know, it's impossible to predict the future. Okay. But you kind of want to time it a little bit. Like right now is a good time to buy because we can see where the trend is going down. So if you bought now and you found one that had good cash flow and you can set that up, you can get both sides of the coin, and we can work with you on that as brokers and as property managers. All right. So hopefully there was some interesting data here for you. It was definitely interesting to me seeing how if you bought the dips, it really does hold true. As a stock investor and a Bitcoin investor, it's all about buying those dips, but the data supports you can buy dips in real estate and be very successful as well. All right. So if you have any questions, and you're watching this on our website, click my little video on the bottom right corner there and reach out, connect with us, call our number. It's on the top of the site, and let's connect. And I love to answer any questions. All right. Thank you.